Hello, everyone. I'm Melody Dumi, curator of Chinese collections and the International Dunhuang Project at the British Library. And I'm delighted to welcome you today to the launch of the Georgetown IDP Lecture Series, following the Silk Roads to North America. So this series, which will run every Wednesday until the 25th of August, is organized to celebrate the upcoming completion of the Georgetown IDP North American Silk Road Collections Project, co-supervised by Georgetown University and the International Dunhuang Project at the British Library. So the Georgetown IDP North American Collections Project, which has been generously supported by the Henry Luce Foundation and the Dunhuang Foundation, was set up by Susan Whitfield, former director of the IDP, Michelle Wang and Miki Morita. And I'm very grateful to the three of them because it's been a wonderful adventure. So the project began in 2016, and it will virtually bring together Silk Road manuscripts and artifacts that are dispersed in North American institutions by incorporating images and metadata about these items into the IDP's public database. Before we start, I wanted to express our gratitude to the Henry Luce Foundation for funding this lecture series, and to Anastasia Pineski for all her help around the organization of this event. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Miki Morita and Dr. Michelle Wang today for their opening lecture, which is entitled The Georgetown IDP Project, Prospects for Collaboration and Research. Miki Morita is the project manager of the Georgetown IDP Project, and she received a doctoral degree from the University of Pennsylvania with a focus on Buddhist art in the Turfan region during the period of the West Uyghur Kingdom. And prior to this project, she had worked on pieces in North American collection that demonstrate connections with Central Asian culture during her pre- and postdoctoral fellowships at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Georgetown University. Michelle C Wang is associate professor in the Department of Art and Art History at Georgetown University. She's a specialist in the Buddhist and Silk Road art of Northwestern China, primarily of the 6th to 10th centuries. First book, Mandalas in the Making, The Visual Cultures of Esoteric Buddhism at Dunhuang, which was published in 2018 by Brill, examines Buddhist mandalas of the 8th to 10th centuries at the Mogao and Yulin Buddhist cave shrines in Northwestern China. In addition to her research on mandalas, Michelle has also written about art and ritual, miracle tales, and of animated statues, the transcultural reception of Buddhist motifs, and text and image. So I would like to end by saying that Miki and Michelle's presentation will be followed by a Q&A session. So please don't be shy. Do send your questions in the Q&A via the Q&A button on the screen during the talk, and we will take them at the end. It is now my honor to hand over to Miki and Michelle. Thank you.
Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone. And thank you, Melody, for your kind introduction. In my 10-minute part, as an introduction to this talk and this lecture series, I will briefly introduce the Georgetown IDP project, which served as the impetus for this lecture series, exclusively focusing on pieces from North American collections. Please go to the next slide. Initiated in 2016, the Georgetown IDP Project is a project co-hosted by Georgetown University and IDP, which aims to collect information and metadata on manuscripts and other types of objects that were discovered in Northwestern China and are currently housed in North American institutions. The project intends to make them collectively accessible through IDP's public database. Prior to this project, IDP had already made efforts to collaborate with North American collections. Selected pieces from several North American institutions listed on this slide have already been part of the IDP database. There were also ongoing discussions with a few additional institutions, and the Georgetown IDP project was planned with goals to follow up with those institutions and further develop IDP's partnership with other North American institutions. Please go to the next slide. With these goals in mind, we needed to first determine the selection standards for the IDP-related materials for North American collections. Various types of media, such as manuscripts, book prints, paintings, artifacts, and textiles. From a geographical region covered by archaeological expeditions in the early 20th century, more specifically, Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, Western Inner Mongolia, and Gansu Province, from the period between 200 BCE and 1400 CE, two 13th century manuscripts from Tibet, and any archival records related to archaeological expeditions in the early 20th century that covered the geographical region defined above. To identify relevant pieces dispersed across multiple institutions in North America, we first contacted all institutions with known holdings of IDP-related materials and that have not been part of the IDP. Subsequently, information on the project was distributed to various professional organizations, museums, and the libraries through listservs and direct contacts. The number of relevant pieces varies depending on how we count some of the pieces, such as multiple fragmentary manuscripts stabilized on one sheet. But I could say that we have identified around 1,300 pieces so far, dispersed widely in North America, from the East Coast to the West Coast, as far as Hawaii. This is not the final number, as there might be additional pieces yet to be identified. We also have not been able to explore many Tibetan or archival materials at this time. I'd like to remind you that not all pieces that we have identified can be a part of IDP at this time, but so far we have concluded agreements to include pieces into the IDP database with 12 institutions. We have also been holding ongoing discussions with several institutions, including the Wexner Center for the Arts, the Peabody Museum of Harvard University, the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Brooklyn Museum, whose pieces are included in the following slides. A notable aspects of the provenance of North American collections are the travels and expeditions in China during the early to mid-20th century. From European expeditions, there are so far two pieces that could trace back to Stein's expeditions. One of them is a Stanic Buddhist banner painting of Mahamari, the Peacock Constantine, in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the other piece is the print of Guanyin Bodhisattva, now housed in the Royal Ontario Museum in Canada. The banner will be featured during the main part of this talk by Professor Michelle Wang, and the Royal Ontario Museum's print will be the theme of Professor Namdun's talk on August 4th. There are also a few pieces associated with Paul Perrier in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Cincinnati Museum of Art, and an important set of pieces that originated from the German expeditions during the early 20th century, currently housed in several North American institutions, most notably the Smithsonian institutions. In addition to those, some pieces that originated from the expedition of Henry Luce, a German geologist, eventually landed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Expeditions and travels associated with North America also played a major role in the formation of notable collections. The Harvard Art Museums hold pieces from the expeditions of Brandon Warner and Forrest Jane, which includes a well-known statue of the Newland Bodhisattva from Lincoln. As was Huntington, he was primarily a geographer interested in the effect of climate change on human culture and civilization, retrieved a group of manuscripts and artifacts from Central Asia, which is now housed in the manuscripts and archives of the Yale University Library. Oscar Tukowski, an electrical engineer and also well-known traveler, retrieved around 140 Cantonese and Sanskrit manuscripts, but manuscript fragments currently housed in the Library of Congress. Georgetown University brought an important collection of archaeological findings and archival photographs from England, eventually to the United States. The collection is now housed in the Princeton University Art Museum, the East Asian Library at Princeton University, and the Royal Library. Princeton University's East Asian Library holds manuscripts collected by Dion and Just, who was the founder of the Just Engineering Company and the second visitor to China in the early to mid-20th century. There is also a stone pillar from Gansu Province in the fourth collection of the Field Museum in Chicago, collected by Dr. Lobo, who went on 2 expeditions to China, intact as a long-term curator for the museum. Next slide, please. The process of identifying pieces related to IDP has informed us the rich variety of pieces in the North American seafloor collections in terms of types, forms, time ranges, and archaeological sites. Manuscripts in Chinese, kept in multiple North American museums and libraries, mostly in small numbers, mainly consist of Buddhist texts. It also contains Chinese classics such as the Amulet, as well as sacred ornaments. In Chinese manuscripts, including those on wooden pieces, were written in various languages and scripts, such as Sanskrit, Cantonese, Prakrit language in Kharosthi script, Tangut, Tibetan, and Old Uyghur. Next slide, please. Painting in North American collections, mainly Buddhist in nature, also plays significant importance for seafloor studies. I have already mentioned them in my past works and talks, that a group of newer paintings, largely originating from the German collection, are essential in considering the pictorial program of cave temples of sites such as the Kizhi Caves.
Miki, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
We're told that there is a bit of an echo. I wonder if it is something to do with your microphone. I'm really sorry for interrupting, but I think some people are having trouble hearing.
So what should I do? Echo, microphone. So if I use, let me check my microphone. I think I'm just using this earphones. But if I stop this, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of an echo. Oh, maybe that is better now. Do you want to try again? I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay. So I'm now speaking through my computer, I think. And so you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to start over from the painting section again. Paintings in North American collections, mainly Buddhist in nature, also play significant importance of seafloor studies. I have already mentioned them in my past works and talks, with the group of newer paintings, largely originating from the German collection, are essential in considering the pictorial programs of cave temples at sites such as the Kizhi Caves. One of paintings contains some standing examples reflecting Yoga religious practices, such as the group of paintings of Guanyin Bodhisattva associated with Bhutan, and the double-sided banner painting of Uyghur female figure from Japan and Europe on this slide. Textiles provide another important aspect that vividly reflect vigorous cultural exchanges along the seafloor, and there are fine collections of textiles in North America, such as this quote on the left, made of Sogdian textiles with patterns of confronted ducks and pearl rounders. In sculptures, besides the well-known statue of kneeling Bodhisattva in Bhutan, we also find examples from other archaeological sites, such as Kupang, Rajahal, and Chochu. In addition, there are a group of figurines directly derived from expeditions in the early 20th century, one from Warner's expedition to Kentucky, another originating from Kempner's expedition, and lastly, the one from Huntington's expedition. Next slide, please. Finally, there are many other objects that are worth noting, including a group of gold ornaments in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which are currently related to the period of the Tibetan Empire, in the group of 145 slides capturing pieces from the German collection in the National Gallery of Art. These slides were created originally as a part of the geographic survey of immovable works of art in 1943. Although not all of these North American collections will be added to IDP database through this project, the process of identifying them is a rewarding process. It is my sincere hope that more emerging research on North American collections will appear in the future, and that material from the IDP database can contribute to such studies. Thank you very much for your time and attention. And the next section is going to be Professor Wang's from the Buddhist.
Great, thank you, Miki. And next slide, please. Okay, great. Thank you, Miki, for your overview of the Georgetown IDP Project for North American Silk Road collections and some of the objects that researchers can access from museum and library collections throughout North America. In my part of the presentation, I'd like to introduce you to a Silk Road banner in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. This was one of the objects that Miki Morita, Susan Whitfield, and I examined over the course of the project. Subsequently, Susan and I, along with Xin-Wan, who will give a lecture in this series on August 11th, co-authored an article on this painting that appeared a few months ago in the Metropolitan Museum Journal. The subject of this painting, which you see on the left, is the Buddhist deity Mahamayuri, or the Great Peacock Wisdom King, who is known in several texts translated by monk translators from oasis kingdoms in the Tarim Basin. These texts extol the apotropaic and healing properties of the Dharani, or Buddhist incantation, that was associated with Mahamayuri. The distinctive iconographic characteristics of the deity are its association with peacocks in visual representation. Is commonly shown either seated atop a peacock vehicle and or holding peacock feathers. In this painting, we can also see that the deity holds in its left hand a golden medicine bowl. This alludes to its healing properties, in addition to the apotropaic properties that it offers. In this painting, the deity stands underneath a tasseled canopy on top of an open lotus pedestal. The floral motif is echoed by small blossoms that descend from the sky and appear as if suspended in midair. I focus on this painting for two reasons. First, it is unquestionably one of the finest and most important Silk Road objects in North American collections, both for its relatively fine and intact condition, and as well as the insight that it provides regarding the rapport between Dunhuang and the neighboring Silk Road kingdom of Khotan. And you can see the locations in the map in the lower right corner of the slide. Second, the path to uncovering the pre-modern and modern provenance of the painting entailed a collaboration between three researchers that took us to Silk Road archives and collections in North America, Europe, and to the Dunhuang caves in China. The project also benefited from close collaboration with the Metropolitan Museum's Department of Asian Art and Department of Textile Conservation, for which we are grateful. Therefore, the path toward producing this article represents exactly the sort of collaborative research project that we hope will result from our raising awareness of Silk Road artifacts in North American collections. Next slide, please. To begin, let me introduce what a banner is and how it is constructed. And you can see a diagram of a banner on the left. And these were objects, often paintings, sometimes completely made out of textile, that were commonly made out of silk, hemp, and less frequently from paper. In the early 20th century, the British-Hungarian archaeologist Mark Orlstein collected 230 banners from the Mokao caves at Dunhuang. Among them, 179 were made of silk, 42 from hemp, and 9 were made from paper. The different parts of the banner consist firstly of a triangular banner head. Next, the rectangular body of the banner. This is in the center of the diagram on which the painting was executed. This could also consist of one or multiple pieces of fabric stitched together with no painting at all. There are also streamers that were attached to the sides. And here they were attached to the wide banner around the banner head, as well as to the bottom of the painting. A wooden weighting board held the streamers together at the very bottom of the banner, and a loop at the top of the banner enabled it to be hung from poles, as you can see in the image in the center. This is a painting from the British Museum showing a bodhisattva, the guide of souls in the afterlife, holding just such a banner from a pole. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a mural fragment in which there are two banners. They're suspended from a stupa or Buddhist reliquary mound. And both of these images, we can see how banners were intended to sway and turn the wind, and that they could be viewed from both sides. So this is a very different mode of display, for example, from the more familiar hanging scrolls of East Asian painting, which were displayed hung against a wall, in which only one side was visible. Next slide, please. I wish to emphasize that this painting can only be understood by placing it into the context of Silk Road collections worldwide, and that many of these objects may be found in the IDP database. As others have uncovered through their research, Silk Road objects arrived to library and museum collections in North America through a variety of means, through expeditions, and also through more diffuse means of transmission. One task that my co-authors and I took on was to try to discover the circumstances by which the banner came to auction at Christie's London in 2007. And this is provenance research that Susan Whitfield conducted for our article, and I will return to that at the end of my portion of the presentation. The painting was listed at Christie's London in a May 15, 2007 sale, lot 171. And the sale was titled Chinese Ceramics and Works of Art, including Export Art. It was titled as a very rare Tang Buddhist painting from the collection of Fred H. Andrews, OBE, and it was dated to the 7th to 9th century. And I will also return to who Fred Andrews is over the course of my presentation. And what is interesting about the way in which the banner was identified when it came up for auction at Christie's London is that it was placed within a Chinese painting context. It was identified as a Tang Dynasty Chinese Buddhist painting, and it was given Tang Dynasty dates from the 7th to 9th century. However, the research that my colleagues and I conducted revealed that the painting, in fact, bears traces of the close alliance between Dunhuang and Khotan, and the painting should be dated slightly later to the 9th to 10th centuries. China, followed by Tibet, ruled Khotan between the 7th and 9th centuries. After Khotan and Dunhuang each gained independence from the Tibetan Empire in the mid-9th century, their rulers developed close alliances that were forged through intermarriage and through trade. The dates of Khotanese manuscripts from Dunhuang, as Shimon points out in his portion of the article, also support our dating of the painting. Next slide, please. And key to our study of the painting is a translation that was done by Shimon of a Khotanese inscription on the verse of the painting. And it identifies the rank of a Khotanese official, the official's name, and also states that this banner painting was dedicated in Leva Bodhi of the Four Assemblies, meaning that it was produced for the benefit of all Buddhist devotees. The Four Assemblies referring to monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen, so monastics as well as lay people. Khotanese is a Middle Iranian language, and what is interesting is that this inscription was written in Brahmi, which is an Indic script. The inscription had previously gone unnoticed on an earlier viewing of the painting. This is because the painting had been mounted on a fabric panel prior to its sale at Christie's London, and it was mounted verso side down. And since the inscription was written on the verse of the painting, it can only be seen very faintly from the recto. So from the recto, and this is the view that you see in the left-hand image, it looked actually quite smudgy. And on the image on the right, you can see a close-up view of the inscription as it looks having been written on the verso of the painting. And in order to allow the inscription to be read, the Department of Textile Conservation at the Met undertook the painstaking process of removing the painting from the fabric panel and turning it onto the recto side so that the verso side faced up, thus allowing the inscription to be viewed and studied by my colleagues and myself. Because of damage to the silk, it's difficult to know how much text is missing at the end of the inscription, as Shimon writes in our article, or what the content may have been. It may have communicated the wishes of the donor, or perhaps, but less likely, a date. And if you take a look at the article, you also see that Shimon discusses other Dunhuang documents that provide insight into the donative activities of Khotanese devotees in Dunhuang. And so this painting would seem to be one example of that, that the official, and this would have been a quite high-ranking official, may have had this painted banner made in Khotan and brought to Dunhuang, or perhaps may have been resident in Dunhuang himself and then commissioned the silk banner there. Next slide, please. The painting is virtually identical on both sides, with the exception of minor motifs, such as the placement and rendering of the small blossoms. The side that we identify as the recto is the side that has black ink underpainting. Black ink outlines were then covered by red ink outlines. You can see that in this close-up detail from the recto of the painting. Because of the translucent quality of the silk, the black underpainting was visible from the recto onto the verso and enabled the same composition to be painted on the verso of the painting. The verso contains red ink outlines, but not a black ink underpainting. So we see the black ink only on the recto. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier, Buddhist banners such as these were meant to be viewed from both sides. And in some cases, such as in the Met banner, the same image was painted on both sides of the banner. Double-sided imagery in Silk Road banners could be produced in different ways. So I've just described one way in which double-sided imagery could be produced in the case of the Met banner. For banner paintings made in other materials such as hemp, hemp offers a much more opaque painting ground than silk. And so when hemp is used to make banners, the images on the verso and recto of those banners were drawn or transferred separately, either freehand or through the use of stencils. So banner paintings made on hemp may not always bear the same motif on both sides, unlike the Met banner. And the banner that you see here is in Berlin, and this is a banner that has paintings on both sides, and the motifs are different though related. So here we have on the left, the guardian king of the East, and on the right, the guardian king of the West. And they are very close. There are some differences in the painting of their faces. The armor that they wear is quite similar with some differences in coloring. And they're respectively identified by their attributes of a bow and arrow on the left and a flaming jewel on the right. Next slide, please. It was important for my co-authors and I to establish just how unique an object the Met banner painting is, particularly in the format in which it was produced, that is, as a silk banner. And earlier Khotanese documents and paintings were frequently made on wooden panels rather than on silk. And here we see two examples from the British Museum. So at the top of the slide, you can see a wooden slip. This had been broken down the middle at some point. And then in the lower right-hand corner, we can see an example of a painting made onto wooden panel. And these objects are actually quite small, so presumably meant to be hung or placed against a wall. And sometimes painted on both sides, actually, in those cases, very different motifs. And next slide, please. And let's see, there are also mural painting fragments. And in the fragment on the right, which is reportedly from Khotan, and we can see a fragment of a deity holding a peacock feather in its hand. And so this might suggest another example of Mayuri painting from the silk roots. And on the right, I pointed out the peacock feather in the mural painting fragment from the Scrine collection in the British Museum. And on the left, I pointed out the peacock feather in the Met banner painting. Next slide, please. The silk banners that recovered by Oral Stein from the so-called library cave at Dunhuang, Mokao Cave 17, a group of 10 that were gathered during his second expedition serve as a particularly instructive point of comparison for the Metropolitan Museum banner. And this group is now divided between the British Museum in London. There are 3 paintings, and in the National Museum of India, New Delhi, there are 7 paintings. So not all of them have been illustrated. So here I'm showing you 6 of them that have been published. And these works display stylistic traits of a mixture of Khotanese and Himalayan artistic traditions, and the latter which reflects on the Tibetan occupation, the Tibetan rule over Khotan. The body type in particular is considered to reflect the style of mural paintings in the region of Khotan, in particular the rather soft body type and lack of articulation or musculature. And nevertheless, it's difficult to imagine that these paintings constitute a set. They don't seem to conform to any particular iconographic grouping. One similarity between them is that they all wear crowns. They also wear garments that consist of brightly patterned and striped textiles. And their bodies are painted in quite deep opaque colors. This is distinct from other Dunhuang banners. But nevertheless, the question might be asked whether the Met banner is related to them as an object with a Cotonese provenance. Next slide, please. One banner from this group of 10 is particularly interesting, and this is a banner of Vajrapani that I show you here. And it too bears an inscription, and like the Met banner, it is also inscribed on the verso. And I'm pointing to that inscription. You're seeing the recto side, and what you're seeing is actually the ink kind of bleeding through to the recto. And this inscription was written in Tibetan, and it simply provides the deity's name, so Vajrapani, in a few syllables. And this is an intriguing comparison to make because I've alluded earlier to the period of Tibetan rule over Khotan, which subsequently ended in the mid-9th century. And it is a Tibetan practice for paintings to be inscribed on the verso paintings, although typically the materials that are made that are used to make Tibetan tanka paintings are heavier than silk. And so it's interesting to question whether that practice may have spread to Khotan during the period of Tibetan rule. And one unintended effect then would have been that inscriptions that were inscribed on the verso subsequently became visible from the recto. And next slide, please. We'll compare it to, let me just dwell on this for a moment. And here we can see that the two paintings, although with the one on the left with a Khotanese inscription, the one on the right with a Tibetan inscription, but seemingly bearing some stylistic Khotanese traits, are nevertheless quite different. And this is another aspect that sets the Met banner painting apart, its fineness and the fineness of the painting style. And another aspect that distinguishes the Met banner from the group of 10 that I mentioned earlier, divided between the British Museum and the National Museum of India, New Delhi, is that the Met banner is twice as wide as the other 10. And so it seems to be perhaps somewhat related, but there's nothing to indicate that it was considered as part of a group, or indeed even though that any of those 10 banner paintings were considered as part of a group or set. Next slide, please. And when compared to other Dunhuang banners, such as the one that you see on the right, an Avalokiteshvara banner, the fineness of the Met banner becomes even more apparent. So we can note, for example, the delicacy of the painting style on the left, the unusual attention paid to textiles, the pattern effect of the textiles, which is something that we don't always see in Dunhuang banner paintings. Oftentimes the textiles are painted in solid colors. And you can also see note the delicacy of the painting, particularly in the treatment of the face and the body in the Met banner on the left, all of which are quite distinct from the Dunhuang banner on the right. Next slide, please. Silk road textiles are another body of material that bear relevance to the Met banner. And this took me to the Victorian Albert Museum to view textile fragments such as the example that you see in the lower right corner. And the textile fragment you see in the lower right corner is actually a very good comparison for the textile of the skirt-like garment, the dhoti that is worn by Mahamayuri in the Met banner. And this type of pattern was produced through the so-called clamp resist dye technique. And on the right, we can see a multicolored textile similar to what we see in the painting on the left. And this was a technique in which wooden blocks were carved with symmetrical patterns, juxtaposing convex and concave shapes. The wooden blocks were fixed on either side of a piece of cloth or folded piece of cloth and clamped together, hence the name of this technique, after which the cloth was placed in dye. The convex areas resisted dye, while the concave areas created space for the dye to soak through the cloth. Multicolored patterns could be created through a combination of repeated clamp resist dyeing or through hand painting by brush. Next slide, please. Comparisons to Dunhuang mural paintings are also important in order to understand the cultural and religious milieu of the Met Banner. And these are paintings that are in situ at the Mogao or Peerless Caves in Dunhuang in present-day Gansu province in northwestern China. And what is interesting about this body of paintings is that they were sponsored by local elites, by the Dunhuang rulers and others in that circle, rather than by Khotanese patrons. So here we have, we are seeing sort of two sides or two approaches to the same iconographic motif. And this unusually fine and detailed mural painting depicts a four-armed Mahamayuri seated on the back of its peacock mount. And the peacock is standing on an open lotus pedestal, and the curves of its outstretched wings echo the two lower arms of Mahamayuri. We can also note that Mahamayuri is also holding peacock feathers in his hands. And there's also a ring of peacock feathers alternating with flames enclosing the mandorla behind the body of Mahamayuri. And this is a mode of representation which actually echoes very closely a ritual manual attributed to the 8th century monk translator Amoghavajra, in which a description is given of the lotus pedestal and the Mahamayuri seated on the back of the peacock mount and its resplendent jewelry. And next slide, please. Nevertheless, we can see that there are differences in painting style and also in composition. So whereas in the painting on the left, Mahamayuri is standing on a lotus pedestal, on the right, the deity is shown seated on the back of a peacock mount. In fact, this is the mode of representation that is more commonly familiar to us throughout East Asia. And so this suggests that even if there was a local cult of Mahamayuri, firstly, I think we can draw two preliminary conclusions. Firstly, that devotion to Mahamayuri was carried out on the part of both Khotanese and Dunhuang devotees. And secondly, that there were different approaches to the visual representation of this deity. And that, in fact, may have been in some part based upon the material support and format. So the deities that are shown painted in silk robe banners of the sort that you see on the left are basically generally shown standing, and this is a bodily position that echoes the rectangular shape of the banner. Whereas in a mural painting of the sort that you see on the right, there's a much larger pictorial surface for the artist to work with. And in turn, it facilitates a more complex composition in which we see not only Mahamayuri, but also flanking attendant figures and a much wider, broader composition than we see on the left. Next slide, please. We can also put the Met Banner in the context of Mahamayuri images that appear elsewhere in China. And I'm showing you a sculpture on the left from Beishan Cave 155 in Dazhu in present-day Sichuan province in southwestern China. And this is a little bit later in date. And Dunhuang paintings, such as the Met Banner and the mural paintings, are important pieces of evidence for ascertaining the cult of Mahamayuri because it had been hypothesized that the cult of Mahamayuri developed during the Tang Dynasty in Sichuan before having been transmitted to Dunhuang. However, since we know that certainly the Met Banner and the mural paintings are dated by inscription, also by style, earlier, that is to the 10th centuries, it now seems equally likely the cult of Mahamayuri may have developed first along the silk routes before being transmitted to Sichuan in southwestern China. Next slide, please. And we must also bring Dunhuang manuscripts into this conversation as well. And what I'm showing you is a letter from the Khotanese king, Bishishe, to the Guiyizhen ruler, Cao Yuanzhong. And this is a document in which there's a letter written on the recto by the Khotanese king. And in it, the king describes the Khotanese victory against the Karakhanids, the first Turkic Muslim dynasty, and their capture, that is the Khotanese capture of Kashgar. And this is an important document that provides insight into the battles that were fought between the Karakhanids and the Khotanese. And although this letter describes a military victory on the part of the Khotanese victory of Kashgar, its occupation of Kashgar, stretched the resources thin, and this was a short-lived victory. As the Karakhanids continued to wage battle against the Khotanese throughout the 10th century, and finally defeated the Khotanese in the year 1006. And Khotan subsequently fell under the rule of the Eastern Karakhan Khan and became a city of strategic importance in interstate diplomacy with later Chinese and non-Chinese regimes. And this is important to us because it suggests that with the increasing precarity that Dunhuang Khotan experienced during the 10th century, that one possible reason for the interest in Mahatma Yuri may have been the benefits that were offered by the deity, specifically protection and its apotropaic powers, and that this may have been equally appreciated by the rulers of Dunhuang as well as the rulers of Khotan. Next slide, please. We know from other examples of artworks that the Khotan was associated with other protector deities. And what I'm showing you is 4 images from group 8 protector deities of Khotan, and these are painted on the north slope of the quarter ceiling of one of the caves at Dunhuang, and the remaining 4 from the set of 8 were painted on opposite slope. And a well-known motif from the Dunhuang mural paintings is a group of 8 protector deities of Khotan. Among them, the most well-known of which is by Shravana, the guardian king of the north. And these 8 protector deities are known from a variety of Chinese, Khotanese, as well as Tibetan sources. And what is interesting is that in one of the Dunhuang caves in which Mahatma Yuri appears, that is Yulin Cave 33 in Anxi, we see the 8 protector deity motifs. And in the same cave, we also see a painting of Mahatma Yuri. And in this particular cave, which represents a coherent program, this might suggest to us, indeed, that one appeal of Mahatma Yuri to Dunhuang and Khotanese donors was precisely its offer of protection. Next slide, please. Having traveled along the Silk Roads, let's return to the main focus of this lecture series, which is on North American collections, in order to understand why the Met banner is part of the Georgetown IDP Project. And this requires knowing more about Fred Andrews, from whose family collection the painting was auctioned at Christie's London. And as Susan Whitfield writes in our article, Fred Andrews was a friend and assistant to Stein, and during Stein's expeditions, Andrews assisted with their cataloging and with their study. And they met at the time that they first met. Fred Andrews was in fact an art professor. And nevertheless, it's still puzzling how this painting ended up in the collection of the Andrews family. From Susan Whitfield's archival research, she ascertains that Andrews never traveled to Central Asia, and it seems unlikely that he had the means to purchase the painting on his own. And what seems most likely is that given Stein's practice, in fact, the common practice of the time of sharing materials with other scholars for firsthand studies. So I guess an analog version of maybe sending a JPEG today to colleagues to take a look over, that perhaps the painting maybe in a bunched up state, as was not uncommon when the documents and paintings were recovered from the Dunhuang Library Cave, that the banner may have been entrusted to Fred Andrews for study or maybe restoration, and then somehow remained in his care until it was forgotten and then discovered by his family. So nevertheless, there's still a lot of question marks. There's still a lot that we don't know about what happened to the painting after we believe it was discovered by Stein at Dunhuang. But given Andrews' skill and facility with the study and cataloging of silver paintings, it seems very likely that it was given to him for study and then kind of remained under the radar, so to speak, not having been accessed into a museum collection until just very recently. Next slide, please. I hope that our presentation today has demonstrated the value not only of studying Silk Road artifacts in North American collections, but also putting them into the context of Silk Road material culture worldwide. And with this presentation, we hope to encourage precisely these types of research projects by introducing you to further materials, not only today's lecture, but also in the lectures to follow. Last slide, please. Thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you on August 4th for the next lecture by Dr. Amanda Goodman on the many lives of a Buddhist devotional print, a dated Dunhuang document in the Royal Ontario Museum collection. And Miki and I are happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Miki. Thank you, Michelle, for your really interesting presentation. So we've had a few questions from the audience, which I will read out for you. The first one was addressed to Miki, I think, and that was from Conrad. We were asked whether with the sheer breadth of the time period that the collection covers, did that lead to any issues in terms of deciding what was to be included and what wasn't in the project, such as, you know, regime changes, the movement of borders, etc. Miki, you're on mute, I think. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Okay. So as I said in my presentation, I think for that purpose, we set the selection standards at first to make sure that we select objects that are relevant to the IDP database and the scope of IDP. So the things in the collections that have already been a part of IDP and the IDP database work as a framework for this project's standards. So we didn't really particularly have many problems in terms of selecting objects and deciding on what to do. We occasionally had that issue. When I sent out a mass email to, not mass email, sorry, when we directly contacted like the small museums in the States, they contacted us like, oh, we have these objects and then are they relevant or not? And then sometimes we need to do some research to decide on whether they are appropriate for the collection or not. But overall, we didn't have many issues. And then, yeah, so just one aspect is Tibetan materials, I think, because I'm not really a Tibetologist, so I really have a hard time what will be appropriate for the ADP, but we finally decided to focus on the 213 manuscripts for the Tibetan materials. So we did that program as well.
Thank you, Miki. I think that the next question is for Michelle then, and that was from Sam. I think you partially answered it, but you might want to expand. Was since the Mahamahiri Dharani was used for healing poison and snake bites, do you think there was a healing function to the banner?
Okay, yes, thank you for that question. I think that's absolutely a possibility. And I'm not sure if everyone can see the question that was typed into the Q&A box, but in some of the Buddhist text concerning the Mahamahiri Dharani, a monk is gathering firewood for the monk's bath in order to warm the water, and then is bitten on the ankle by a black snake, and then is instructed to reset the Mahamahiri Dharani in order to be healed from the poison of the snake bite. And so I think this is absolutely one possibility. And I think that without knowing more without long conscription, I think that's as good a guess as any, actually. And that would be absolutely one pretext to which Dharnis were recited and circulated. So, yes.
Thank you. The next question was also from Conrad, who asked, if the inscription is on one side of the banner, but the banner, does that mean that the banner is intended to be seen from both sides? Does that mean that there was a preferred side to be seen, that it would be seen from, or not?
That's an interesting question. So I'm assuming that at the time that banners were displayed, that you would have to make a judgment call about, at that point about which side the rector or the front side was. And I'm thinking that that might be more pertinent if a banner were displayed indoors, maybe in an interior setting than in an exterior setting, where it would be, where it wouldn't be a stable viewing context, where the banner would constantly be whipped and turned on by the wind. And in fact, there are Jinhan pairs that refer to this kind of the twisting, turning motion of banners in the wind, especially one way of kind of dispersing their blessings upon Buddhist devotees. So, so I think yes, I would have to say yes. I think it's very possible. But then the question is always that I think if there was a preferred side for viewing, so if you do have the same image on both sides, the question of the preferred viewing side really just comes down to the text, to the inscription, because that would be written on one side. So I don't know of an instance in which an inscription was copied on both sides of the banner. So that does lend, I think, another interesting, I guess, twist to your question, which is, are we talking about a preferred viewing side or rather a preferred reading side? And that actually, I think, maybe relates more closely to manuscript culture, in which this is very common at Dunhuang as well, because of the scarcity of materials, in which manuscripts will be written on one side of a scroll, and then later the paper would be reused. And then other texts, sometimes completely unrelated, maybe different languages, will be written on the backside or the verso. So that is an interesting question. But again, I see no reason why there wouldn't have been a preferred viewing or reading side.
Thank you. There's also a question from Xinwen, who is attending the presentation, asking, are there any publication plan of a catalogue of the findings of the North America collections? So,
yeah, I think that is a very important question, because as I said in the presentation, not all pieces that we have identified will be a public IDP. So I think the most useful information for many scholars and people who are interested in these national collections, at least the institutions, holding institutions, accession numbers, and the title of the piece, the list of the information for all identified pieces will be very useful. So I do want to make that information available eventually, but so far I haven't had any application. I think my vague idea of that in the future is that if I can work with some kind of website where I can post this information, and then as we find more objects, or as we find that some objects are irrelevant to IDP scope, we can quickly edit that list. So that is the idea I have, that I will try to find some opportunity. I do want to make this information public for the benefit of everyone.
right, thank you. That might be phase 3 of the project. So we've got also a question from Spriha. We were asked, thank you for an interesting talk. I wonder if Professor Wang could talk a bit more about the gender of Mahama Yuri in the banner and in the textual sources. So I also wonder if the painting techniques used on the banner are similar to those on wall painting fragments from Khotan.
Yes, the gender Mahama Yuri, very, very tricky question. So in some textual sources, Mahama Yuri is actually, the name Mahama Yuri is actually the Great Peacock Wisdom Queen, not the Great Peacock Wisdom King. So in fact, Mahama Yuri can be gendered female and does appear as female in other imagery outside of China, outside of the Silk Roads. I don't have any, so all I can say is that from the Dunhuang materials, Mahama Yuri appears as a masculine figure. So it's very obvious in looking at the images. I don't have a good explanation for why. So all I can say is that I think, given the complexities of Buddhist practice and transmission, that in China and in Dunhuang in particular, that Mahama Yuri is gendered male. And I would say it's the same for the images in Sichuan as well, but I don't have an explanation for that. Are the painting techniques similar to those of wall paint fabrics from Khotan? Yes and no. So silk paintings, silk is prepared differently from wall paintings. For wall paintings, there are layers of preparatory material, plaster that are put on the interior surface of a rock-cut Buddhist cave in order to smooth the surface for painting. This is a very different process from sizing silk. So at that level, it's very different. However, the pigments used could certainly be the same, and the methods of preparing the pigments. So my answer would be yes and no.
Okay, thank you. I noticed I missed a question from Dilwov, which is the IDP Georgetown image manuscript database available for open access? So Miki, do you want to take that? Or?
Well, I think that maybe you are probably
So the images, yeah. Well, I mean, you can add to it. I mean, the images and metadata about the collection items that will be incorporated to the IDP website. And I think we've got the last slide. We'll have a link to that website. Will be, you can download them to reasonably high resolution, but obviously the copyright remains with the institutions, and some of which make all of those open access. But that would, and I think you can also go back to the individual institutional websites. The idea is that it reunites virtually all those collection items on the same platform to facilitate research. I hope that answers the question. Miki, is there anything you'd like to add to this? No? Thank you. And then one last question, which is again about the banner. So Michelle, have you got any rough sense of how long it would take to create, like the material itself and then the image?
Yes, thanks for that question. I think I would say that we don't have all the information that we need to know in order to determine how long it would have taken to create the painting. So for one thing, we could ask whether there was a stencil or maybe some sort of preparatory drawing that was used to make the painting. So the Dunhuang Library Caves is an incredible trove of material, and we are assuming that the Met banner came from the Dunhuang Library Cave, probably recovered during Stein's second expedition. From everything I've seen so far, and what I think I've demonstrated during this talk, is very unique. Is unique from other Dunhuang paintings, from the mural paintings, and so it doesn't seem likely that it was made in a modular fashion. I think that's what I'm trying to say. And if we take a look at the sculpture of Sarah Fraser, for example, she has demonstrated that there were preparatory drawings that were used in the preparation of Buddhist banners from Dunhuang. So from what we have at hand, and the library cave as an archive is not perfect. There must certainly have been materials that were not preserved, but I haven't seen anything that looks like a preparatory drawing or a stencil. So if we had such a stencil, that would have cut down on the production time for making this banner. Other factors would be how was the silk procured? Was it very easy to get the silk? Was it gifted to a temple as part of a donation, for example? How easy was it to get the materials, the painting materials? Were they quite rare? And again, it seems to me that the painting is unusually high quality. It's unusually a high quality. It's unusually delicate in its painting style. So that would lead me to believe, without giving you an exact time frame, that it may have taken a little bit longer to make this painting, maybe than a banner painting that was produced from a stencil that was made in a more modular fashion. So, and I actually think a really great comparison would be perhaps to look at contemporary Buddhist painting traditions, and that's something actually I'm not very familiar with. So, for example, to look at contemporary the production of contemporary Buddhist paintings elsewhere in Asia, and to try to get a sense of what the production time is for those. So that doesn't answer your question exactly. It's not a question that I've asked, but these are the sorts of questions I would ask if I were to arrive at a more definitive response. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that's it for the questions, and that's pretty much all. We are bang on time. So thank you very much. If anyone has got any further questions, I see someone put something out, you can also contact us, and we can follow up with Miki and Michelle. Yes, you've seen, I think you've had ample time to also see the list of the next presentation. So by all means, please register there every Wednesday on Zoom. And we're looking forward to having Amanda Goodman next week. So yes, just to conclude the series here is how you can contact us. So idp@bl.uk. And you can follow us on Twitter. There's also a blog. We've got a blog, and Miki contributed several posts in there if you're interested in finding out more about the project. And then this is finally at the bottom, the link to the IDP website, where the images and metadata will be made available. So to conclude this first lecture of the series, I would like to thank the audience for joining us. I know this can be an awkward time for our friends in America, and thank you very much, Miki and Michelle, for your wonderful talk. So bye for now. Thank you.